So when people heard that my father was a Jewish comedian, and I was going to be presenting, they said, no, they told me, you'll do jokes. And I said, no, I don't do jokes. My father did jokes. I'm here to tell you about my dad. And what you see here is from one of his skits in vaudeville. And my father, Al Nesor, is one of the most famous comedians you never heard of. And after I share with you his credits, you'll say, how come I never heard of him? This is just a very brief listing of some of his credits. My dad started, his career actually took a very traditional trajectory for many comedians of his day. He quit high school, his senior year in high school, to join a vaudeville variety show, and that was the first slide that you saw. And he would also became a social director at the Catskills, the Borscht Belt in the mountains, where he worked at such hotels as the Waldemere, the Laurel, and then he graduated to becoming a headliner comedian at places such as Grossinger's, the Concord, the Nevele, Fallsview. Perhaps some of you have heard of some of these hotels. Well, my dad, as I say, started off as a social director, producing, directing, and performing, and he was the local tumbler, if you know the expression, where he would really get all the guests involved and active and excited. And then he would host the comedy shows, and then he actually did a stand-up comedy routine. He moved on, actually during the summers before I was born, he and my mother and my older brother and sister used to spend the summers up in the mountains, the Catskills, where my dad was working either as a social director or performing in the hotels up there. And then he also performed at nightclubs in New York City, and sometimes here in Miami Beach, sometimes out in Philadelphia. And his most famous gig was at the Red Mill on Jerome Avenue in the Bronx. Now, I was much too young to remember, but whenever I was out with my dad, people would stop him, and this could be 40 years later, and say, I saw you at the Red Mill. So that's what I know of the Red Mill, people stopping my dad and remembering his performances at the Red Mill. He also performed at the Latin Casino, not the Latin Quarter, but the Latin Casino, which was a prominent nightclub in Manhattan at the time. And as I said, up in the hotels in the mountains, until he got blacklisted for being a blue comedian. Now, for those of you who don't know that term, blue comedy is attributed to risque and vulgar language. And in those days, the only people who could get away with that type of comedy was Belle Barth, if any of you remember that name, and later on, Lenny Bruce. But for my dad, it really put a stigma on his nightclub performances and careers. But at each turn, a downturn led to an upturn. And he started to audition for Broadway theater. And these are some of his credits as he moved on and continued to do club dates. But I'll go into some detail about the shows that he was in on Broadway and some of his movies. I remember the day his agent called and told him he had gotten a role in the second cast of Guys and Dolls, the replacement cast. It was still on Broadway. And he got the role of Benny Southstreet, one of Nathan Detroit's sidekicks. And that was his first role on Broadway. And then through the 50s and the 60s, he had a steady career. And we'll talk a little bit more about Little Abner, which was one of the highlights of his career. He also performed with Phil Silvers and Nancy Walker in Do Re Mi, with Buddy Hackett and I Had a Ball, and Richard Kiley, and several other prominent shows. He was in a City Center revival of Kiss Me Kate. He also performed in, let me get the list if I'm not remembering all of them. Those were really the highlights. Oh, Do Re Mi, and okay, the original One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Kirk Douglas. Now, most people don't even know it was a Broadway show before it was a Hollywood movie. And who starred in the Broadway? First of all, do you know who made the Hollywood movie?
Yes, Michael Douglas.
Michael Douglas. And who starred in the Broadway show? Kirk Douglas. Did Michael get Kirk to play the lead role in the movie? No. So that was one of the few flops that my father appeared in. And why was it a flop? It was ahead of its day. It was a dramatic play, not a comedy, as most of his other plays were. And it was ahead of its time because of the subject matter about patients in mental institutions being lobotomized, based on the book by Ken Kesey. So it's very controversial, and it had a very short run on Broadway. However, as kids, we always went backstage. We went to all the opening nights of my dad's shows, and we also went backstage and met all of the people he performed with, all of the stars. And I used to have quite a selection of playbills with wonderful autographs, but I got on a clean kick one day and tossed them. Who knew? Who knew? Anyway, so we go backstage after a matinee, and my father introduces my sisters and I to Kirk Douglas. And Kirk comes over to peck me on the cheek, and I got carried away, and I imagined myself as one of his leading ladies on the screen, and I go into a clinch until I realize, oh, he's just aiming for my cheek. Anyway. And then as far as Buddy Hackett, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with his routines on TV and everything. Buddy Hackett was actually a fan of my dad's when my dad was the star and before Buddy Hackett, and other people like Jerry Lewis, Robert Morse, Rodney Dangerfield used to come and see my father perform, and they kind of learned their craft from him. He was one of their role models. Anyway, so they found roles for him in their properties when they did become stars. So Buddy Hackett, you know that when you're performing in a play, there's a script. Well, Buddy Hackett never followed the script, which means that all of his co-performers needed to figure out when their cues were coming, because Buddy ad-libbed the entire show. From one night to the next, one never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. So my dad's most famous role was as Evil Eye Flegel in Little Abner. He was the man in the green suit who would give the whammies that would paralyze Abner. This is an Al Hirschfeld caricature. If you remember, the New York Times used to, Hirschfeld used to do these for all of the shows, and my dad's right there in the middle, right there. His most infamous role was in Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, which was, forgive me for taking God's name in vain, it was the most god-awful movie you ever saw. And it was actually, has the dubious distinction of having been voted the worst movie ever made. However, that obviously elevated it to the status of cult and camp film. So now if you turn on your TVs during the holiday season, there is not one Christmas that goes by where this movie, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians, isn't shown.
Surprised to see us? You're under arrest, Bulldog.
He's a great audience. What can you say?
Stop playing with toys. Put it away, Kima.
Air blaster.
We have a weapon that's much more potent than that. As you may know, we are holding Santa Claus a hostage. One false move, and your little ho-ho-ho man will be destroyed.
Who's he calling a hoe?
All right, what do you want, Bulldog? These are our terms.
Big mosquito.
First, destroy the toy machine. Second, we will release Santa Claus if you promise to send him and the Earthlings back to their planet. Third, no more joy through toys nonsense on Mars.
And D, we want all political prisoners released.
You win.
Are you sure you have Santa Claus?
You know we have him.
You mean you had him?
You know, if Charlie Callis and Jamie Farr had a son...
How did he get out of the cave?
Jim, the idiot!
How did he get here so fast?
Santa Claus has powers that you don't know about. All right, time's up.
Big enough. Margot, go on.
And for years, we would get residual checks that performers get, $8, $11.23 for his performance, his residuals for Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. So what was our family life like? Well, my mom and dad were married for 66 years. This obviously was the year they got married. And it was really my mom who was the glue, and we had a very normal life, I have to say, a very normal middle-class life, thanks to my mother, who was the glue of the family. She held it together. She kept us all focused and in a very conventional way. When I was about a year and a half, not in this picture, but a little bit later, when I was about a year and a half old, my parents relocated us from Manhattan to Forest Hills, Queens. This is the back of our home in Forest Hills. I'm there with my 3 sisters, and I imagine my brother is the one who is taking the picture. And as far as our Jewish life goes, well, we celebrated the holidays. Again, thanks to my mother, and she would light Shabbat candles every Friday night, and I still have her brass candlesticks, which when I'm home on Friday nights, I do try to light. And we would celebrate the holidays together, nice dinners for Rosh Hashanah, and even though my father was not religious, he attended Cheder as a little boy, and growing up, and he became a bar mitzvah, but the rest of his life he was not very observant other than the family holidays. However, on Passover, we did a full Maxwell House Seder, and he read the whole Haggadah verbatim up until the festive meal, and we never seemed to get past the festive meal. However, it wasn't until I started to educate myself as an adult that I finally knew who all those rabbis were who spent the whole night talking about the Exodus. But I didn't learn that directly through our Passover Seders. So at my brother's bar mitzvah, a picture here with him and my sisters and my cousins, my father invited the entire cast from Guys and Dolls, in which he was performing at the time. And each one of them, Pat Rooney Sr. was an elegant old gentleman who used to do a soft shoe with the white spats and all. He got up to perform for the guests. Some of my father's, the singers that he performed with, they got up to perform. That was normal, didn't everybody? We just assumed that this was how families lived. And people have asked me, well, did you hang around with other famous people's children and show business personalities? Not really, not really. I had friends from school, their fathers were salesmen, lawyers, teachers, and my father was in show business, so like what else is new? We just took it for granted. One thing my father instilled in us, when my sisters and I would spend every weekend down in Manhattan in Times Square going to one Broadway show or another, and we would meet my dad between matinee and the evening performance, and we'd meet him for dinner. We'd always go to Q Lung's on West 45th and 46th Street. then we'd go home and he would go back to the theater for his evening performances. But he always advised us not to bother if we saw a star, a personality, whatever, don't hound them for autographs. So we were always too cool for that, except at the opening nights. And when he brought us backstage, I was able to ask for autographs. But if we saw someone in a restaurant or whatever, my father's feeling was, it's their private time, don't disturb them. So this is a picture of my family, my brother Harvey, I'm standing next to him, my sister Carolyn, Dad, my mom, and my sister Bonnie. As I said, it was I think, a very normal and happy, functional middle-class life. So I would like to leave you. After my dad performed in Do Re Mi with Phil Silvers, he adopted one of these songs from that show, not one that he sang in the show, but one that that really sums up his life and his philosophy. So I would like to play that for you now. I did not have a clip of my father performing this, but I think you'll recognize it. And as I say, it became his theme song, and he would end every one of his performances. I also forgot to add that after vaudeville, the Borscht Belt, Broadway, movies, he was in Harry and Sons with Paul Newman and Robbie Benson, and you saw his most infamous movie, Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. After all of that, when he retired, and through the 50s and 60s, that's when he was doing his performing on Broadway and continuing with the nightclub performances. And even as in my high school and college years, he would be driving up to the mountains, to the Borscht Belt, to play at the hotels and clubs. And I would sometimes drive up with him to keep him company. And I didn't realize at the time, I look back now, that was a good 2-hour drive from our home in Forest Hills. But I felt, he could use the company. And we'd come back, we'd drive up for the evening, and he would always come home at night, never stay over, to be at home with his family on Sundays, when we would go and visit with aunts and uncles, cousins, or go out to Rockaway Beach. So again, a very conventional type of upbringing. Not at all glamorous, but we accepted it. So let me play that for you.
It's so important to make someone happy. Make just one someone happy.
Make just one heart the heart you sing.
You sing
to one smile that cheers you, one face that lights when it hears you, one heart your everything to fame. If you win it, comes and goes in a minute. Where's the real stuff in life to cling to? Love is the answer. Someone to love is the answer. Once you've found him, build your world around him. Make someone happy. Make just one someone happy, and you will be happy too.
Way back some memories. When I see a comic today, the most funny comic is somebody who can get up there and not to say anything, just the visual that looks. There was a Jewish, way back in New York, there had to be a Jewish theater It was a comedian called Menashe Skolnick. Does anybody hear of that?
Right.
Yeah, he used to get up there and just stand on the stage. He didn't have to say a word. And I remember as a kid, my father taking me to see Menashe Skolnick.
My dad, in the early days, he did some performances of his clean comedy routine on TV, and there he would. Can you kill this? Let's get rid of this. Thank you. He would ham it up with a lot of facial expressions. You saw from the pictures he has a very unique and expressive face, and his early comedy was very much visual and facial. So yes, yeah.
Diane?
Edith.
Did when your parents got married, he was already in showbiz?
My grandparents, I'm told, really didn't approve of my dad's profession. They didn't think that he could make a good living for a family. However, he proved them wrong. And my mother, he was the love of her life. She was, as a matter of fact, they eloped to the mountains. And then finally, a few months later, admitted to her parents that they had gotten married. So they always celebrated, maybe a lot of people here have, celebrated 2 anniversaries. And we never, as kids, knew which one to celebrate for them. So they did it double. But yeah, so my grandparents did not consider it. They knew each other from teenagers. They met when they were 12 years old and they were married. You know, in their, my mom was 19, my dad was 20, and they were married for 66 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
He
So,
always wanted, this is what he wanted.
yeah.
This is what he always wanted.
Yes, his family was the most important thing to him.
No, showbiz was what
Oh, showbiz was what, yeah, to satisfy my grandparents, he tried a stint in sales, and he was very unhappy. I think that maybe lasted 6 months. And I heard stories from one of my siblings that during the war effort, he actually did work in a factory for a while. But he always came back and ultimately stayed in show business.
Wonderful story.
Yeah. Ellen?
I just want to tell you, I thought you were terrific.
Thank you.
And I consider you a friend, and this like shows a whole other side of you that's just fascinating, and I don't know, a softer side. And thank you for sharing with us and being so honest. And you didn't cry, which is amazing to me.
You didn't see me rehearsing. I would drive to work every day trying to sing that song, and I couldn't get it out without it drawing tears.
Well, you made me cry.
Thank you. Robert.
Was he on when he was off stage, and was he always funny and hamming it up?
Well, with the family, how can I put this? Yes and no. I mean, there was always a lot of laughter in the house. And my parents developed, in his early years, he had friends from show business who were very close. But after we moved to Forest Hills and our life became more conventional with 3 and then 4 kids, their social life revolved more. My father obviously was the social one. I mean, he was out there. My mom was really the behind the scenes, the wind beneath his wings, if you will. And so he started to attract people in the neighborhood, local shopkeepers. His best friend owned the local Jewish bakery, salesmen in the haberdashery who loved his stories, and they were frustrated comedians. So they would share stories. So they developed a circle of friends called the South Sagiv Club. Why South Sagiv? Well, there were about, I don't know, 8 or 10 couples, and they always promised that one day they were going to go to Las Vegas. Las Vegas, South Sagiv. Never got to Las Vegas, but they used to have hilarious evenings together. And when it was my parents' turn to host, we had a 3-story roadhouse in Forest Hills. And our rumpus room, family room, basement was on the lowest level. And there was this steep staircase leading down to it. So my parents' friends would gather for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres and lots of stories and laughs and jokes back and forth. And we kids would sit at the top of the stairs listening until we got the message, time to go to bed. And then my parents and their friends would start with the adult stories. Now, when I said that my father was allegedly accused of being a blue comic, he never used vulgar language. He never used sexually overt material. His comedy was double entendre, had double meanings, and his audience knew what he was getting at. Only I didn't. I was too naive. So he would tell stories, and inevitably I'd say, I don't get it. And I'd get in, oh, Diane. They knew I wouldn't get it, just like I'd flub a punchline. I never got his punchlines.
Beverly, he was in Harry and Sons.
Yes.
What part did he play?
My dad was a character actor.
Right.
Except for Little Abner, where you, and Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. You wouldn't notice him necessarily, but there was a scene with Robbie Benson. I don't know if Ellen Barkin was in the cab at the time. He played a cab driver who was driving Robbie Benson to the hospital for his wife's birth, or his girlfriend's birth. So it was a small bit part.
Because
yeah.
I saw that movie on HBO.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Then I saw it, I think, on Showtime.
Right.
I hope it comes again now.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, it's always a thrill for me when I happen to surf onto one of his movies on TV. It brings a very warm feeling to my heart.
Did any of your siblings go into show business?
Okay. My father actively discouraged all of us from pursuing careers. My brother was very musical, and my father just felt it was too tough a profession and career, and he didn't want his children to have to go through all the stress and the anxiety that he went through from one club date, one job, one show to the next, never knowing, never having that job security. So when my brother had the opportunity to attend MIT, to become an engineer, that's what my father made him do. And I still remember when Harvey would come home from Cambridge for the holidays, I'd wait up for him, and we'd sit in the kitchen, and he'd play his guitar, and we would sing Kingston Trio songs mostly. That's what we loved to do. My older sister Carolyn has, some of you have met her and know her, has a beautiful, sweet voice. But again, my dad felt she's not strong enough either in her singing ability or in her drive and motivation to be really hungry to want this career. So again, she was dissuaded from it. As for me, I performed in every single school play from first grade up until junior high. And in junior high, I had a supporting role in, I forget, The Man Who Came to Dinner or whatever the play was. And when my cue came, I froze. And that ended all of my aspirations for ever performing again. So, however, now I can sing with the TI Singers, so it comes out again. But he did not encourage us, and I guess none of us had a strong enough drive that this is what we needed to pursue in our careers.
I have a question.
Alan?
I'm just curious, I'm a performing musician myself. So were there voice lessons, dance lessons, acting lessons, a study routine, a practice routine? How did he learn his craft?
He was a natural.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He may have taken, I don't even think he ever took singing lessons.
Self-taught.
Self-taught. This is what he wanted to do when he had the opportunity. Like I said, he was a natural. He just picked it up by himself, never went to acting studio or anything.
He had the drive.
Yeah.
He had the drive.
Yes.
To do it.
Yeah.
And were there agents and management?
Oh, yes.
Lawyers? It was a big business as well?
No, there were agents.
And management?
The agents managed him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that was it. Yeah.
And I have strong family ties to South Fallsburg. Now, you named a half a dozen hotels, and that was in the center of all of them.
Right.
And I worked in the South Fallsburg area, at Bellhop, and the Emerson Hotel, and Lenny Bruce funny, happy, one thing, another. I'm curious, does anyone else have any relationship to that area? So, I'm not surprised.
And, I mean, I don't know, now I'm listening to you. My dad was also a Jewish comedian. And so I'm going to do a presentation. I don't know what twist, because you covered some of the stuff, but it was a different experience. But I spent almost every summer up there, so.
Yeah. In South Wallenberg?
Yeah.
Somewhere in, wow, that's my family's turf.
I used to have a shoebox filled with the soaps from all the hotels.
My grandfather sold those.
Well, along with the autographs on the playbills, those got dumped also.
That was a summertime gig for my dad and my grandfather.
Right.
When I was listening to
Grossinger's, Concord, Neville.
Listening to you, I was thinking, I bet our dad's passed.
Oh yes, I know your dad's name. My father would mention it. Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting.
So Alan, to get back to your question, I have a box full of my dad's notes for his routines. I remember he used to sit with, that all of the comedians have comedy writers. It just doesn't come. They have someone writing for them, and then they tweak it and they make it their own. So in the same way, my dad would take material from various sources. I remember he had the Joey Adams joke book. I used to lean over his shoulder while he was writing things down. So I went through this box of his notes, stories, and he used to tell stories, more than one-liners. And don't ask me to tell one. I couldn't make heads or tails because they were just jottings. He filled it in and he knew what the plot line was. I did find complete scripts from some of the variety shows, which I'm assuming he produced probably for the Catskill hotels. Maybe someday when I retire, I'll be able to, transcribe them.
Why don't you donate them to a Jewish museum in New York?
Perhaps. Zoe.
Yes, I thought you were wonderful.
Thank you.
Except I was appalled and disgusted with one thing you said.
What was that?
I saw Santa Claus conquers the Martians.
Yes.
And I thought it was wonderful.
High camp.
I saw it at the Terrace Theater in
It's one of those movies that's so bad, it's good.
I was a kid when I saw it.
We have a modern equal to that. Something about sharks.
Maybe we'll have a showing at the temple.
Sharknado is a modern equivalent of that, yes.
Well, I want to thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to reminisce about my dad and to bring up all these good memories. Thank you very much.